no dork. She's a trailblazing Indian diva that marches to the beat of her own drummer.
Never Have I Ever's second season just came out, and we have a lot of thoughts. It's a show that follows the story of Devi, a first-generation Indian American teenager who craves a glamorous high school experience.
We are glamorous women of color who deserve a sexy high school life.
Still recovering from a traumatic year, and as she prepares to elevate her school status, Devi faces a whole new set of pressures as she deals with family, friends, and love. So far, it sounds pretty much like any other teen drama, right? Well, sort of. The show does inherently possess a certain mass appeal because of its genre, but its popularity can also be attributed to something else: its emphasis on South Asian representation. Mindy Kaling, one of the creators of the show, constantly references representation as what fueled the creation of the show. By including characters who look like her and reflect her own experiences, Kaling is intending to carve a place for Indian Americans in pop culture, while avoiding the caricatures of the past. The execution of this idea, however, tells a totally different story. So why is Never Have I Ever not the triumph everyone thinks it is?
Some old loser was telling me that I'm too Indian, and some other people think I'm not Indian enough. And honestly, all I want to do is eat a donut, but I'm stuck here.
Never Have I Ever has a choice in how to deal with Devi's heritage. It can portray Devi as just a normal girl dealing with high school and family drama, or it can delve more deeply into Devi's identity to explore what it's like to be an Indian American teen. It seems like the show has taken the second option, which is fine, but if Devi is having an identity crisis, then she should experience some sort of growth or change by the end. And she doesn't. Let's take the relationship that Devi shares with her mother, Nalini. It's clear from the very first episode that there's some sort of friction between them, and it's also apparent that this develops as a result of their ideological differences. Nalini, presumably born and brought up in India, is used to a different life than the one Devi desires. Many South Asians, especially a first-generation Indian American teenager like Devi, can relate to this sort of conflict, and this is actually a pretty great setup to tackle the topic of immigrant parents, and by extension, culture conflict. We're given some resolution to this conflict in the last episode of the first season when Devi and her mother make amends. This doesn't quite resolve Devi's identity conflict, but it's a step in the right direction, and honestly, a better publicity strategy. I mean, Netflix wouldn't want to renew a show for a second season if every issue was resolved in the first. Okay, cool, fair. Then we get to season 2. We meet Anisa, another Indian American who immediately makes Devi insecure.
Devi was in awe of this cool Indian teen. She had always assumed her unpopularity was because of racism. But this new kid was proving that Devi might just be objectively lame.
Her character is the perfect way to reintroduce Devi's identity conflict, since Anisa is the embodiment of the perfect Indian in Devi's eyes. However, Devi's hatred of Anisa grows not from her own problems with culture, but from her jealousy for Anisa's blossoming relationship with Ben. And then the show makes the relationship the catalyst for Devi's actions, but it still tries to convince you that it stems from a more deep-rooted place of identity conflict. And that's a problem. At this point, we aren't even surprised. Just take a look at what Mindy Kaling said was the reason for giving Paxton a personality. That in order to make the love triangle a fair fight between Ben and Paxton, we need to learn more about Paxton. So that's why they did the episode where he finds out more about his own family's life and his grandfather's experience in Japanese internment camps. It would make sense that Anisa is conveniently added for the drama and not to complete Devi's more significant character arc. So, is the show trying to explore Indian American identities or not? It seems like it's taken a dangerous middle ground approach, briefly mentioning the conflict without ever truly addressing it, even though there are clearly unresolved issues about Devi's heritage.
I love being Indian.
Real convincing, Devi.
And it all boils down to bad writing. Ultimately, Devi's character ends up exactly where she starts. Another criticism of the show has been about how unlikable Devi is as a character, and this is where things get complicated. Is it a bad thing to have a deeply flawed main character?
Definitely not.
In fact, it was the intention to make her imperfect. Devi is a three-dimensional character, and a part of that means giving her big flaws and seeing her make mistakes over and over again.
I think she's just a really relatable character, honestly, to everyone. Hence why, when she makes all those mistakes, people still root for her.
Here's the thing, though. The problem with Devi's flaws goes beyond the limited representation that Indian Americans have. It's that when Devi says or does bad things, like when she expresses self-hatred and distances herself from her heritage repeatedly,
She's just so Indian. Like, the other day, she said she was gonna open the TV instead of turn on the TV.
the show doesn't point out that this behavior is an example of internalized racism, and Devi doesn't learn from these mistakes. This version of racism, where it's almost exclusively this Indian American character who hates herself, with little to no acknowledgement of the social factors that can make someone feel that way, seems more like it's enabling this behavior than explaining it. Devi is also made out to be this incessantly annoying teenager who will accept nothing but her own way. Her attitude towards other characters, even her best friends, is too often because of a personal benefit or loss, which comes off as extremely manipulative and selfish, and at times, straight up bullying. Not a good look. The only real explanation given for the huge mistakes Devi makes all the time is this.
I don't know if you know, but she lost her father suddenly not long ago, and we've struggled a bit with it.
Very sorry to hear
And that's not an excuse, Noor, but I promise you, we are a good family. We've just gone through a hard time.
And that is a valid explanation for some of the things Devi does in the first season. A reason why, even though Devi's flawed, she does deserve a shot at redemption. But, by the second season, the show distances itself so far from its origin point that it doesn't feel like a valid explanation for her mistakes in season 2. So even though the show wanted Devi to be a flawed, sometimes unlikable character that we can still empathize with, it's hard to empathize by this point. She doesn't seem like a good person who does bad things. She just seems like a bad person.
Oh, God.
Okay.
Look, don't get us wrong. Never Have I Ever is a huge milestone for Indian American representation, and the inclusion of Indian and Indian American artists among the actors, writers, and directors is a big deal. But we can't forget that this representation has a long way to go to be as authentic as it should be. Indian representation in the West has been plagued with caricatures and bad accents.
Lucky mouse.
And although this show tries to be better, sometimes it misses the mark.
Wow, I feel like I'm being pranked.
Grow fresh tomatoes for takli sambar.
I would never prank you. Oh, you're handsome. I hate pranks.
April Fool's is way scarier than Halloween.
The burden of representation shouldn't be on a single show, but we still want the show to do better, so that we don't risk settling back into the stereotypes that we're trying so hard to move past. So, are we glad Never Have I Ever exists? Yeah, but do we think it's a triumph?
What? No.
But there's no one perfect example of South Asian, Indian, or Indian American representation out there. So, if you're wondering what to watch next, here are a few options. Pushpavali is a comedy drama show about a deeply flawed character who tries desperately hard to be with the guy she's in love with. Made in Heaven is about two wedding planners who run into all sorts of chaos as they and their clients deal with the conflict of tradition and modernization. And if you're looking for a movie, try The Big Sick, about a Pakistani stand-up comedian falling in love with a woman who's falling ill. Or, like us, despite the YouTube video full of criticism for Never Have I Ever, you can just shut your brain off, stop thinking about representation, and just treat the show like any other high school comedy.
So you don't think I'm crazy?
No, I think you're crazy, but in a good way.